Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we are going to be discussing the Buffalo Sabres and if they are the worst team in NHL history. Now, the Buffalo Sabres embarrassed themselves once again in their last game. They had a 3-0 lead going into the third period. They blew that in regulation, went to overtime, and lost in overtime against the Philadelphia Flyers. And that 18th straight loss matches the most in NHL history, tying the 0-4 Pittsburgh Penguins for that record. But when it comes to the Buffalo Sabres, how bad are they truly? And among the worst teams in NHL history, how do they stack up? And are they the worst team the NHL has ever seen? Watch till the end for all the answers and all the opinions, and hit that subscribe button if you're new. 65% of the people that are watching these videos are not subscribed, so every bit helps on the road to 33K. Now, obviously for the Buffalo Sabres, their record is astonishingly bad, but it's not just terrible in the modern day. They're one of the worst teams statistically in NHL history. When we look at their record, they have a 6-23-5 record, 17 points in 34 games played to start this season, on pace for a 41-point year in normal 82-game season. And for the Buffalo Sabres, that would be among the worst ever. Now, when we look at the two modern day examples of just terrible teams, the two that I think come to mind the most would be the 2020 Detroit Red Wings last year and the 2017 Colorado Avalanche, as two teams that were terrible beyond their years and beyond the rest of the league. But first and foremost, for the Detroit Red Wings, if they played a normal season, they would have been about around 46, 47, maybe 48 points, and that would have been around what they finished at. The Colorado Avalanche also finished with 48 points in 82 games played, but this Buffalo Sabres team is on pace for 41 points, and that's taking into account the wins they got earlier in the season. If this losing streak continues, they'll be at an even worse rate and among the worst in the NHL's whole entire history. Now, they right now, in terms of point percentage, since 1990, finish at the 9th worst rate in NHL history. But if we take out expansion teams in that whole metric, there's only one team that has a worse points percentage, and that is the 1990 Quebec Nordiques. They're in absolutely terrible company in terms of the worst teams ever. Now, I think we also have to talk about the elephant in the room here, and that is expansion teams. Because if we count expansion teams, the Buffalo Sabres, points-wise, in terms of their points percentage, are 9th worst since 1990. But again, taking those teams away, you have them around number 2 or number 1 in terms of points percentage. That bad on the dot. But those expansion teams, I think, are what's going to be pointed towards as the whole worst team in NHL history argument. Because there's going to be a lot of people saying that those teams are automatically the worst in NHL history. They'll just look at record and call it a day. And I think there is some valid points to that still. In terms of actually being terrible, they might be the worst roster and the worst play, but these are expansion teams we're talking about. Not every single expansion team was given the Vegas Golden Knights roster and went to the Stanley Cup final, and it was amazing off the bat. You look at the Washington Capitals and the Ottawa Senators and the San Jose Sharks and the actual assets they had to work with. They were given table scraps and absolute nothing, and was just told to be in the NHL and play hockey, which did not go too well for some of those teams, I might say. To me, the Washington Capitals, that 1975 team, might be the worst on paper and maybe the worst team in NHL history, but comparing them to the Buffalo Sabres have way more to work towards. They actually had some hope going into this season and were looked at, as some people in the organization, as a team that could compete. Meanwhile, for the Washington Capitals, they had no expectations and again had pretty much nothing to work with. I know which team is more embarrassing, and we know now which franchise has also been a little bit more successful. Now, for me personally, I'll push the expansion teams aside in the worst teams ever debate because, again, the NHL saw them as teams that were going to absolutely stink at first. They didn't give them anything to work with and just threw them into the wolves. So I think I'll give a little bit of slack to them and just say they were supposed to be bad. They had no expectations, and of course they were bad. But again, comparing that to the Buffalo Sabres, who, after signing Taylor Hall and getting a couple acquisitions, had some hope going into this year, I had them in I think I had them second last in the division in my predictions. I saw them being bad, not being terrible, but being bad and still in the same way. And I think this Buffalo Sabres team kind of reminds me a little bit of that 2017 Avs team. A lot more than the 2020 Red Wings, because the 2020 Red Wings were supposed to be bad. They were supposed to tank, and they did that. They got shafted by the draft lottery, but that was how it is, and they weren't having any expectations at all. Meanwhile, for this Buffalo Sabres team, there was some hope to be had going into this year. They rebranded the jerseys. They had a little bit of a tweaked logo going back to their old days, and they were trying to rebrand themselves into this new team and this new franchise. We've already seen how that has gone for them, but there was hope going into this year, and I think that kind of reminds me of that 2017 Avs team, who did have some hope, did have some great players, and almost everything went wrong. I think the Buffalo Sabres and the Colorado Avalanche have that the same way. But I do want to say, comparing the both teams before we actually dive deep, is that there's no chance that the Buffalo Sabres are actually going to turn a 180 like the Avalanche did and be a playoff contender in 2018. There's literally a zero chance of that actually happening. But again, in terms of the actual rosters and the actual play between that 2017 Avs team and this team, I think there is quite a bit of similarities for, again, the hype, the somewhat hype that they had going into the year and the promise they had that just absolutely exploded. Now, I think the biggest thing that reminds me of both of these teams is not just how bad they played, but how easy it is for them to somehow find a way to lose. Obviously, the Detroit Red Wings had a lot of that, but it was just mostly them being a terrible roster and just being a terrible team that obviously led to losses. But this Buffalo Sabres team and that 2017 Avs team had talent. There was some great players on that team, but in every single opportunity, they tried to lose. It was almost uncanny how crazy it was, how consistently they would find a way to lose in new and creative ways. I go back to that Blake Como breakaway where he passed it back for no reason. That just exemplified that 2017 Avs team. And you go back to that last game versus Philadelphia where Buffalo had a 3-2 lead, empty netter. The one Buffalo player was right on the Philadelphia blue line. He tried to shoot it, almost got it on net, but it just didn't happen, and the Philadelphia Flyers ended up getting the tying goal, winning in overtime, and the Buffalo Sabres again finding another and pretty creative way to end up losing. That's just how it happens, and that's how both of these teams have gotten to where they are. Now, something that also I think was pretty similar between this team and the 2017 Avs team was just a lot of questions going into how the future would be for both. But for the Avalanche, they stuck with their guns. They kept the players intact for the most part. They kept that core. They kept John Bednar as coach. They kept Joe Sakic as GM. They traded exceedingly well. They drafted exceedingly well. They developed exceedingly well and built a team that could really compete and really grow together. And they learned from those losses. They learned from that embarrassment and got to a level where they could start making the playoffs again and start being a true Stanley Cup contender. With the Buffalo Sabres, you can't say that they'll actually do that with how they've shown their franchise to be so far. This Buffalo Sabres franchise is dysfunctional, embarrassing, pitiful, astoundingly incompetent, and yet there seems to be nothing to want to change that. You also have the bad luck this year of Kevin Adams having to come in as coach because of the COVID protocols, and they're trying to find an interim head coach, and you have the GM going on the bench and trying to be the coach there. There's so much that's gone on. You have Jack Eichel also being injured. You have the Eric Staal trade and all this craziness with the goaltending of Linus Omar being injured. So much has gone against them. But again, you can't say that this year is a blip for the Buffalo Sabres. They have lost and kept losing in the regular season. They have not made the playoffs in 10 years, and yet this is the most embarrassing season. They haven't made the playoffs in 10 years, and they still somehow find ways to get worse. This team is not turning it around, and I've said it again and again. Somehow the Buffalo Sabres do not employ a WHL scout. They don't employ a Liga scout. They don't employ a KHL scout. They don't employ any of those. Yet they're the worst team in the NHL and are supposed to be somewhat retooling and doing anything to draft well. Yet there's no effort made. There's no money put into it. There's no effort and culture whatsoever. It's just an absolute embarrassment of a franchise, and they continue to show that once again, game by game, games, season by season, just how bad they are, just how bad the franchise is, and just how bad this team actually deserves it. And going back to the worst team in NHL history debates, are they worse than the 2017 Avalanche? Yes. Are they worse than the 2020 Detroit Red Wings? Yes. Are they worse than those expansion teams like the Ottawa Senators and the San Jose Sharks? Yes. If you look back on those teams would absolutely kill to get one game of a guy like Jack Eichel. Yet this Buffalo Sabres team continues to waste any talent or resemblance of talent they have ever touched, ever grasped in their dirty, rotten, greedy hands. For this Buffalo Sabres team, they are the most embarrassing team in the NHL. Easily the most embarrassing franchise in the NHL, which, considering what the Coyotes have gone through this year, is kind of astounding to say the least. And in my opinion, when we look at a season-by-season basis in terms of what they were offered, what they had going into this season, and what they could have been, this Buffalo Sabres team, in my opinion, is the worst team in NHL history. In terms of right now, how they're playing, the players that they have on their team, what they could actually do with that, and also just being a bad team in general. I mean, that bottom six is actually pretty terrible, and yeah, there is some issues in Buffalo. I kind of just want to say sorry to Buffalo Sabres fans out there, because I don't even know what to say. I made a video a couple of weeks back on how to fix the Buffalo Sabres, and honestly, at this point, I don't even know what the major thing that'll change this franchise is. I think it starts from the top. I think it starts from ownership, but even that is a lot easier said than done. The Buffalo Sabres are in a terrible spot, obviously. In my opinion, they're playing like the worst team in the NHL, and again, with what they had going into this year, the players that they had, and how legendarily bad they've been, any expansion team would take that any day of the week and will be a lot better than this absolutely disgrace of an NHL team. The Buffalo Sabres need change quick. They need change now. I don't even care if they win their next 10 games. Nothing is right in Buffalo. And hey, with the strong starts they've had in the past, are we really going to be too optimistic about a 10-game winning streak? They're just going to win 20, or they're just going to lose 20 straight right after, and show us once again why the Buffalo Sabres. As you can see on the whiteboard, if you do know a Sabres fan and you can see him in person, make sure you hug him, tell him you love them, because all Buffalo Sabres fans need that right now. And having to watch this Buffalo Sabres team, in my opinion, the worst team in the NHL, you might as well get paid for it, and you have to get paid a lot to actually make it worth it. That's how bad this Buffalo Sabres team is, and that's how much I just do not want to watch them right now. Again, they could win the next game. I don't care. They're the worst team in NHL history, and in my opinion, the most embarrassing team the NHL has ever seen. But that'll be it for today's rant video. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Comment down below, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree with my take? Do you think the Buffalo Sabres are the worst team in NHL history, the most embarrassing team in NHL history, you should say? Let me know all your thoughts. Comment down below, all of them down below, and make sure you share this video with your friends. Get it out there, the Buffalo Sabres misery, and click on this card for all of my hockey rankings content right on one playlist. My name is Nathan. Hopefully you're having a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video or stream. Goodbye.